Do you find writing expressions hard? Can't seem to access dynamic content to insert into an expression? Are you super confused when it comes to nesting functions? In this Power Automate tutorial, I'm going to cover 7 functions you need to know when getting started with expressions. I'll cover how to use these functions in expressions, and I'll also cover common mistakes when it comes to writing expressions and show you a few tips and tricks along the way. As a beginner or even an intermediate flow builder, expressions can seem a bit complex at first. I'm going to try to simplify it for you. If you want to level up your flows by writing expressions, keep watching. Expressions can be used to calculate values, format dates, combine text, and more. By integrating expressions, you can make your flows more efficient and dynamic. A function is a built-in operation. One or more functions must be used in an expression. The expression builder will suggest relevant functions based on your input. To insert the function, press Enter on your keyboard. When building expressions in Power Automate, you might find yourself needing to nest functions within each other. This process is known as wrapping one function around another. To do this effectively, start with the outer function. Next, insert the inner function or expression that you want the outer function to modify. In this expression, the first function is wrapping the split function. Power Automate processes the innermost function first, then moves outward. If you are new to using expressions, you might find it helpful to build your expressions from the inside out. Starting with the inner functions and wrapping them with the outer functions can make it easier to manage your parentheses and ensure everything is correctly structured. Choose the approach that works best for you. I'll be spending most of the tutorial in the Classic Designer as the new designer is still a bit buggy. In the Classic Designer, you can access the Expression Builder by clicking on the Expression tab. In the new designer, the Expression Builder can be accessed by clicking the FX button. You can also access it by typing a / in the editor and selecting Insert Expression. Expressions can also be used in the filter array action and in trigger conditions. I've linked a couple of tutorials in the description box below that cover how to use expressions in a filter array action and how to use them in trigger conditions. Whenever I work with expressions in my flow, I always use compose actions to test out the expression first. This can help speed up your flow building process as you can quickly run a test before using the expression in subsequent actions. You can insert the output of the compose action directly into subsequent actions. Depending on the flow, I find it easier to store dynamic content into a compose action for testing purposes to make it easier to troubleshoot my flow. In this example, I want to test out this expression, and I've inserted the output of the compose action into the empty function. Now I can easily swap out the dynamic content in the expression and run a test without actually having to edit the expression. The expression builder in the Classic Designer can only display a single line at a time. It can be a little difficult to navigate your expression by scrolling back and forth. Instead of scrolling, use the arrow keys on your keyboard. Press the up arrow key to go to the start of the expression. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of it. These keys will also work in the new designer. As you type out a function, pay attention to the tooltip as it displays the function syntax and parameters. The tooltip will bold the parameter you are currently inputting, making it easier to see where you are in the function and what to enter next. This can be especially helpful if you are new to writing expressions. There are a few common mistakes that I see often when it comes to writing expressions in Power Automate. Mistake number 1, writing expressions as text strings. Expressions shouldn't be written directly into an action field like this. When writing expressions, it's important that you use the expression builder. If you don't use the expression builder, the expressions you write will be treated as plain text. Mistake number 2, mismatched data types. Certain functions in Power Automate require specific data types. For instance, using a number in a function designed for a string will trigger an error. This also goes for using a string in a function that expects a numeric value. To convert a number into a string, wrap the number in a string function. To convert a string to a number, wrap the string in an int function. Keep in mind that this isn't just limited to numbers and text. Any type of data mismatch will cause an error, such as providing a boolean, aka true or false, when a string is expected, or vice versa. It's important to carefully read the error messages Power Automate provides, as they can help you identify and fix these mismatches in your flow. Also, don't forget to pay attention to the tooltip, as it'll display what type of data the function is expecting. As you type, the parameter you are currently defining in the function will be bolded. Mistake number 3, null or undefined values. Not accounting for null or undefined values in an expression can also cause your expressions to fail. It's important to handle potential null values appropriately to prevent your flow from erroring out. The first 2 expressions we're going to cover can be used to prevent your flow from failing if your value is undefined or null. The empty function can be used to check if an object, array, or string is empty. This function will return a true or false value and is often used in conjunction with the if function, which I'll demonstrate a little later. You can use the empty function to check if a question response in your form is empty by inserting the dynamic content from the getResponseDetails action into the empty function. In this case, the single file upload question didn't have any file uploads, so the result of the expression is true. I'll replace the response ID with another one and run another test. This time the result is false, meaning files were uploaded. You can also use the empty function to check if a column in your SharePoint list or document library is empty as well. This function will work on most column types. It's important to note that a yes/no column stores a boolean, aka true or false, and the empty function will not work on this column type. If you try to use the empty function on this column type, you'll get an error. You'll need to use the equals function, which I'll demonstrate shortly. The coalesce function evaluates the values you provide and selects the first one that is not null. This function is particularly useful for preventing errors in your expressions when dealing with null values. It's important to note that the coalesce treats null values differently from empty strings. Empty strings are considered valid values and are not replaced by this function. In this Excel table, I have a few empty cells. I'm going to use the list rows present in a table action to return the first 3 rows of this table. To limit the number of rows returned from this action, input a number into the top count field. This reduces the number of rows returned from this action and speeds up your flow run. In the apply to each action, I'm going to use a compose action to output the value in the number column. Run a test. The output of the compose action for the 3rd row displays nothing. This is considered an empty string. Next, I'll show you what a null value output looks like. In this SharePoint list, I have a few empty cells as well. I'm going to use the getItems action to return the first 3 items of this SharePoint list. In the apply to each action, I'm going to use a compose action to output the value of the number column as well. Run a test. The output of the compose action for the 3rd item in this list looks a little different from the previous example. Here, it displays a click to download hyperlink. When I click it, nothing is displayed. This is a null value. This is also why it's important to use compose actions in your flows to help with troubleshooting. Compose actions are an easy way to verify the outputs of dynamic content in your flow. In this demo, I have a SharePoint list where there are 3 columns for phone numbers and some columns are empty. I want to output a single contact number. The coalesce function can take any number of values and will evaluate each value in the order provided. I'm going to use the coalesce function to check and see if a mobile number is listed first, then an office number, and finally a home number. When I insert the coalesce function, the only dynamic content available to select from is the body and value dynamic content. There are 2 ways to get the dynamic content in this case. The first way is to use the compose action to store the dynamic values, then insert the outputs of the compose actions into the expression. Separate each of your values with a comma. This is a straightforward approach, and you can also troubleshoot the outputs of the dynamic content this way. The second way is to use an expression to get the dynamic content values. Insert the dynamic content into a compose action. Click on the 3 dots of the compose action and select Peak Code. Highlight the text after the @ symbol and before the closing double quote marks. Copy it to your clipboard. Insert the coalesce function, then paste the content from your clipboard into the expression. Press OK for now. Repeat this for the other phone numbers. Click on the expression to edit it. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression. Press the left arrow key to insert your cursor right before the closing parenthesis. Add a comma and paste the content from your clipboard. Don't forget to press Update. Do this one more time for the last phone number. The final expression looks like this. This compose action can be deleted now as it's no longer needed. Let's run a test. For the first item being looped through, there isn't a mobile number, so the business number was returned instead. Another use case for the coalesce function is using it to set a default value if the value returned is null. Instead of using an if function or a condition action to set a variable, use the coalesce function instead. In this SharePoint list, I have a list of clients. If the client hasn't been assigned yet, I'd like to output a default value of not assigned. In the get items action of my flow, I'm going to limit the number of items returned to 5. I'm going to use the create HTML action to output some of the values from my SharePoint list. For the assigned to value field, I'll insert the coalesce function. However, when I try to insert dynamic content into the coalesce function, the only options I have to select from are body and value. Just as we've done earlier, I'm going to use a compose action to get the dynamic content key. The assigned to column in my SharePoint list is a person column. I'd like to return the display name of the person assigned. Since the get items action returns an array of items, once I add the dynamic content to the compose action, it will automatically nest itself inside and apply to each action. If you hover over the dynamic content label, you can see that it uses the items function and references the apply to each action with the dynamic content key appended to the end. Now let's take a look at the dynamic content that has been used in the create HTML table action. Hover over a dynamic content label in a value field. Notice that the dynamic content uses the item function with the dynamic content key appended to the end as well. Instead of copying the expression from the @ symbol, highlight the text including the question mark to just before the closing double quote mark. Copy this to your clipboard. In the assigned to field, insert an expression. First, insert the coalesce function. Next, insert the item function. Paste the content from your clipboard. Add a comma. You may insert additional dynamic content if it suits your flow. Remember to separate each with a comma. In my case, I'm going to enter static text. To enter text, we'll need to add single quotes first and type the static text between them. Delete the apply to each action and run a test. Let's review the output of the create HTML table action. The static text will output in the assigned to column of this table for any items where a person wasn't assigned. The equals function compares two values and returns a true or false result. This function is commonly used with the if function, which I'll demonstrate shortly. It's important to note that the values being compared must be identical for the equals function to return true. You can use this function to compare dynamic content to a string or number or to other dynamic content. In this demo, I'll use the equals function to check if the yes/no column for a specific SharePoint item is equal to yes. A manual flow with the get item action can help you verify the dynamic content output values of your SharePoint list items. Even if you plan to use the get items action in your flow, the get item action will return a single item, which means your test runs will be quick. You can also use compose actions to verify the output of the dynamic content. I'll insert an expression into the compose action and use the equals function. Click on the dynamic content tab and insert the yes/no dynamic content. Add a comma and insert the value to compare the dynamic content to. For this case, I'll insert a yes between single quotes. Run a test. The output is false. Why is that? If we review the output for the yes/no column in the get item action, it outputs a yes. I'll add another compose action to output the value of the yes/no column and run another test. The dynamic content of the yes/no column actually outputs true. For this reason, you will need to compare the dynamic content from the yes/no column to true or false instead of yes or no. Click on the expression to edit it. Delete the yes in single quote marks and insert true in lowercase. Don't forget to press update. Run another test. Now it works as expected. In this next demo, I'm going to check and see if the choice selected in the first question of this Microsoft form is equal to single choice 1. When comparing strings, ensure your string is between single quotes. I'm going to purposely leave the C in choice uncapitalized for this test run. This expression will return false because I didn't capitalize the C in the word choice. Remember that the equals function expects an exact match. To prevent case sensitivity issues when working with strings in your expressions, always convert the strings to lowercase with the toLower function. I'll edit this expression and wrap the dynamic content from the form in the toLower function. I'll also change the S in my string to lowercase. Because the dynamic content has been converted to lowercase and the value I'm comparing to is in lowercase as well, the expression returns true. The if function takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is a condition that returns a Boolean value, aka true or false. The second parameter is the value that is returned if the condition is true. The last parameter is the value returned if the condition is false. In this demo, I have a Microsoft form which is collecting RSVPs. I'm using a SharePoint list to collect all the responses of this form. If the recipient selects that they will be bringing a guest, I'd like the total RSVP to be 2. If they aren't bringing a guest, the total RSVP should be 1. Because the output of this Microsoft form question is not a number, I'll need to use an expression to output a number instead of the value from the form. I'll store this expression in a compose action. If you prefer, you can enter the expression directly into the create item action. Personally, I like to use compose actions in my flows as I can quickly run a test to verify the output of my expressions. First, use the equals function. The equals function takes 2 objects and compares them to each other. Insert the output from the guest question. Add a comma and single quotes. In my case, I'll enter the word yes with a capital Y. This expression is checking to see if the choice selected is equal to yes. Remember that the equals function is looking for an exact match. Run a test. Now that I have a Boolean value, I can wrap this expression in the if function. Click on the expression to edit it. Type in if and an opening parenthesis. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression. Add a comma. The next parameter is a value that will output if the Boolean value is true. To output a number, enter the number only. If you wrap your number in single quotes, you'll output a string. If the recipient of the form indicates they are bringing a guest, the total RSVP count is 2. Add another comma and enter the next parameter, which is the value to output if the Boolean value is false. I'll enter a 1 in this case. Don't forget to insert a closing parenthesis and press update. Run a test. The output of this compose action is 2. You can use the output of this compose action in the create item action. If you want to learn how to get your Microsoft form responses into a SharePoint list, click here to check out the full tutorial. I've also linked it in the description box below. In this next demo, I'm going to show you how to streamline your flow with the if function. Instead of inserting static text into your notification, you might consider using a condition action. However, doing it this way is inefficient as you have to define each of the fields in this action twice. Use an expression instead. As always, I prefer to put my expressions inside a compose action so I can test it out and troubleshoot it. This expression is checking to see if the number of days is equal to 1. If so, it'll output the singular word day. If not, it'll output the plural word days. Now you can insert the output of this compose action into any of your subsequent actions. If you want to convert the output text to lowercase, use the toLower function. Instead of having to manage multiple send an email v2 actions, when using an expression, you'll only need to manage one. If your expression isn't outputting the results you are expecting, verify the Boolean value. Use a compose action to store the expression that outputs the Boolean value. In this particular case, I can verify whether or not the dynamic content I've used in my expression is in fact equal to 1 by reviewing the output of this compose action. Remember that the if function will return the second parameter in the expression if the Boolean value is true, and it will return the third parameter of the expression if the Boolean value is false. The length function returns the number of items in an array or the number of characters in a string. I use this function often in my flows, especially for troubleshooting purposes. Whenever working with actions that return arrays, such as the filter array action, or when I've defined a filter query in actions such as the get items, get events, get files properties only, list rows present in a table, I always include a compose action after to output the number of items returned. In this demo, I'm using a get items action to filter out items with a status value that is equal to in progress with a due date in the next 3 days. Add a compose action. In the compose action, insert an expression and use the length function. Click on the Dynamic Content tab and insert the value dynamic content from the action above. Run a test. I will always add a compose action with the length function before I add and apply to each action. This way, I can confirm that the filter query in my action or conditions I'm using in my filter array action are returning items as expected. If the compose action returns 0, I know that there might be an issue with my filter query or filter array action conditions and can adjust them accordingly. Additionally, I also include a condition to check if any items have returned before moving forward with the flow. In the first value field, I'll insert the output from the compose action above. Change the operator to is not equal to and enter 0 into the second value field. Add the actions you'd like to run into the yes branch if there are items returned from the get items action. If you'd like to run any actions if there aren't items returned, such as an email notification or a Teams message, enter those actions into the no branch. The length function can also be used to return the character count of a string. The split function is used to split a string using a separator into an array of substrings. The split function takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is the string of text you'd like to split. The second parameter is the separator you'd like to split the string at. In this demo, I'm going to show you how to use an expression to output the first name from the profile display name dynamic content. The profile column in my SharePoint list is a person column. I'll use a compose action to store the expression. Add a split function. Insert the dynamic content you'd like to split. In my case, it's the profile display name dynamic content from the action above. Add a comma and single quotes. Between the single quotes, add the separator. In this case, I'll insert a single space. Run a test. The split function has split the display name at the space and has returned an array of items. An array is a collection of items. The first item in an array is 0, second is 1, third is 2, and so on. You can also use the first function to return the first item in an array and the last function to return the last item in an array. For this particular demo, I'll use the first function to return the first name. Click on the expression to edit it. Wrap the entire expression in the first function and run another test. Now this expression is returning the first name from the profile display name dynamic content. I can insert the output of this compose action into subsequent actions in my flow. In this next demo, I have a flow that takes attachments received from specific emails and saves them into a specific folder on SharePoint. If you haven't already watched this tutorial, you can click here to check it out. I've also linked it in the description box below. This flow checks to see if a file with the same name already exists. If so, it'll append a timestamp to the file name. Because the name dynamic content will return the attachment name along with the file extension, we'll need to get the file extension first. These compose actions aren't necessary. A single expression can be written to accomplish the same result. However, to make it easier to understand, I'll be using compose actions. We'll use the first compose action to return the name of the attachment without the file extension. Insert an expression. We'll use the split function. Insert the name dynamic content from the getAttachmentV2 action. Add a comma in single quotes. Between the single quotes, enter a period. This expression will split the file name at the period, essentially returning an array of values. The text before the period will be the first value. The text after the period will be the last value. Wrap the entire expression in the first function. Place your cursor at the start of the expression by pressing the up arrow key. Type in first with an opening bracket. Next, place your cursor at the end of the expression by pressing the down arrow key and insert a closing bracket. Press OK. This expression will return the file name only. Add another compose action. I'll click on the expression label of the previous compose action and copy the entire expression to my clipboard. I'll paste the expression and change first to last. This expression will return the file extension only. Add a set variable action. Insert the outputs from the compose action with the file name only. You can customize the syntax of your file name to suit your needs. I'll insert an underscore and a timestamp. I'll create an expression using the UTC-now function. I'll wrap it in a format datetime function. Add a comma and single quotes. I'll format the date and time using this format. This format will return the year, 2-digit month and date, as well as the hours and minutes, all in a single string of text. Add a period and insert the outputs from the compose action that has the file extension. In the create file action, delete the name dynamic content and replace it with the file name variable. Run a test. The new attachment files were created with a timestamp in the file name. In this last demo, I'll show you how to build a flow that takes interact emails and parses the details of the e-transfer into separate compose actions. The output of these compose actions can be used to create an item in a SharePoint list, add a row to an Excel table, send a Teams notification, and more. As always, I start with a manually triggered flow. This way I can quickly run tests and troubleshoot my flow as I build it. I'm using a compose action to store a message ID. Then a get email v2 action to return an email. The HTML to text action converts the email body from HTML to text. I have a compose action that stores a line break. In this next compose action, I have an expression that splits the text from the HTML to text action at the line break. In this test run, you can see that the compose action has split the email body text at the line break and has returned an array of items. I've copied and pasted the output of the compose action into a text editor so I can see the line numbers. I'm using Visual Studio Code, but you can use others like Sublime Text, Brackets, Notepad, or BB Edit. This step is optional as you can manually count the line numbers if you prefer. Remember that the first item of an array is 0. Since I've pasted the entire array output, which includes the opening square bracket at the top, I'll need to ignore that and offset the line numbers by 2. I'm going to locate the line that contains the sender and the amount of the e-transfer. In my case, it's on line 20. I'll subtract 2 from that, which will give me 18. In Power Automate, insert a compose action to output the 18th item in the array. To do this, we'll need an expression. Insert a question mark and an 18 between square brackets. Place your cursor at the start of the expression by pressing the up arrow key. Click on the Dynamic Content tab and insert the output from the compose action above. Run a test. This will output the 18th item, which is this line here. For my flow, I need to extract the sender and the amount. I'll add 2 more compose actions. Keep in mind the compose actions are completely optional. If you prefer, you can insert the expression directly into your subsequent actions. Personally, I prefer to compose the expressions and run tests first. This speeds up the flow building process and I can verify the outputs before using the expressions in subsequent actions. Add a compose action to split this line at the dollar symbol. Insert an expression and use the split function. Insert the output from the compose action above that contains the string. Add a comma and a dollar symbol between single quotes. Run a test. The split function has split the string from line 18 at the dollar symbol. Now I have an array of 2 items. I've chosen to split the string here so that I can use the expression to extract the sender and the dollar amount. Add another compose action to store the sender. Remember to rename your actions to keep things organized. This is especially important when you have multiple instances of the same action. To get the first item from the array, use the first function. Insert the output from the compose action above. This expression will return the first item in the array above. Next, wrap this expression in the split function. At the start of the expression, type in split with an opening parenthesis. Go to the end of the expression by pressing the down arrow key. Add a comma and single quotes. To return the sender, we want to split the string at the space and the word has. Add a closing parenthesis. This expression will return an array of items. Lastly, to return just the sender, wrap this entire expression in the first function. Press the up arrow key to go to the start of the expression and enter first with an opening parenthesis. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression and enter a closing parenthesis. Run another test. You can use scope actions in your flows to group multiple actions together. This also makes it easy to collapse multiple actions with a single click. Add another compose action to store the amount. To return the amount, we can copy this expression and change a few things in it. Instead of returning the first item from this compose action, return the last item. I'll replace the word first with the word last. Next, instead of the space and the word has as a separator, we'll need a space and capital CAD within parentheses. You can also just insert a space and an opening parenthesis as a separator. We can keep the outer first function as is since we need to return the first part of the output from the split function. The full expression looks like this. Run a test. The amount is outputting as expected. However, because the text is black, this indicates that this amount is a string. I need to convert this to a number so that the value can be added to SharePoint. To do that, wrap the expression in the float function. Run another test. Now this amount is a number. Repeat these steps for each line of your email body that you'd like to extract. Once your flow is ready to go, create a copy of it and replace the manual trigger with an automated trigger. When using automated triggers in your flow, it's always best practice to use trigger conditions. If you don't know how to use trigger conditions in your flow, make sure you check out this video where I cover 4 ways to use trigger conditions in your flow. What other challenges do you have when it comes to working with expressions? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video helpful and want to see part 2, give this video a like and drop this emoji in the comments. Are you easily stumped when working with dates in Power Automate? If so, check out this video. I'll show you how to compose an expression that will return a future date, past date, how to count the number of days between 2 dates, how to check for a birth date and anniversary date, as well as tips and tricks when working with dates in Power Automate. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out when I upload part 2 for this series. Thanks for watching!